In today's video, I'm giving my honest opinion on Secrets of Strixhaven and specifically how I think it will play out in Draft and Sealed. I often make these gameplay videos where I talk about how to do better in your events, but I do often get asked, what do you think of the set? Do you think it's a good set? And so that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. And the answer, short and simple, is yes. This set looks amazing and I'm so excited to play it. Now, why do I think it's amazing? That is going to be the topic of this video. First things first, I think that they've done a really good job bringing back the feeling of the original Strixhaven, but making things better kind of across the board. The original Strixhaven had 5 colleges. They have brought back those exact same 5 colleges here. It is a minor knock from a gameplay perspective, or sometimes major knock depending on how the set is designed, that the set only has 5 supported archetypes. But in this case, I think if they'd gone back to Strixhaven and not done a 5 archetype set, it would have felt off because Strixhaven is a 5 archetype set. Some planes just naturally lend themselves to these 5 archetype environments. And while I think that 10 archetype formats tend to play out a little bit better, I think Strixhaven needed to be a 5 archetype set, and I'm glad they did that. I do think they've done a better job this time around than last time around, making the archetypes all kind of play out well from a design perspective. The last Strixhaven, I mean, it's hard to say without actually having played the set yet. This video I'm making before playing with the set after having analyzed the cards and stuff, and then I'm going to be revisiting this later in the set to see how everything played out. But I think the original Strixhaven did have some flaws where the red-white deck, which is Lorehold, they cared about things leaving the graveyard, and because that's such a unique thing for red-white to be doing, they didn't necessarily nail the landing on all the cards. So coming back with that experience, I think they've done a much better job making red-white play out in a better manner. But just looking at the designs, they seem a lot more cohesive to that plan. Also, the payoffs are a lot better as well. So I think Lorehold is going to be it's already kind of one of the sweetest decks that you could potentially play because no other format has a red-white deck doing this thing that cares about cards leaving your graveyard. And so having red-white be more of a mid-range or control strategy instead of just the dedicated aggro deck is just so cool, and I'm glad they brought back that theming. And also I think it's smart to bring back that theming alongside a mechanic like Flashback to help that work, because people understand Flashback because they've seen it a lot. There's a lot of complexities involved in this set, specifically the prepared mechanic, which I'll talk about in a moment, is pretty complex. And so having relatively straightforward mechanics associated with the decks, I think was a brilliant move. Now, another deck that I think that they're going to do a little bit better with this time around is the black-green deck. That is a deck that cares about life gain, the Witherbloom deck. Then in the first version, they had these pest tokens that when they died would gain you a life. And that's a pretty good way to help life gain synergies and also have some sacrifice stuff thrown in. But in this format, the pest tokens gain you the life when they attack. And there is a small thing where it's oh, if you played the original Strixhaven, maybe you'll get confused or something like that. But I think having them trigger when you attack is so much better from a design perspective while still fitting the flavor of Witherbloom. Because one thing that I think that this set really did well is nailing the flavor. But Witherbloom kind of uses these pest tokens in the lore to fuel their spells. They cultivate the pests and then they sacrifice their life essence or whatever to get their spells going. And so when they die, gaining life makes sense. But also, if they're attacking and gaining life, they're usually chump attacking because they're 1/1s, and so they're still dying to kind of fuel your stuff. But if you have cards that care about gaining life, having it associated with an attack trigger instead of a death trigger just gives you so much more agency, where your 1/1 attacks, you gain the life, and then your opponent blocks it, the 1/1 dies. You end up in a lot of the times the same scenario you would be in if the creature gained you a life when it died. But if your creature only gains you the life when it dies, your opponent choosing not to block can kind of ruin your plans, and all of a sudden you don't get to harvest your pest token for its life essence and work with your spells. And so I think that just, even though it's a little bit not cohesive with the first one, the pest tokens are still filling the same role, and I think they've done a really good job bringing that back. Another thing I they brought back kind of this blue-red theme of casting instants and sorceries, but also rewarding you extra for casting more expensive instants and sorceries. There's often a bias towards playing cheap spells anyway because you have more flexibility with what you can do with them, but the fact that you get rewarded specifically for casting instants and sorceries that cost you're spending 5 or more mana on means that you can maybe play a couple more expensive instants and sorceries than you would otherwise. And I think that having that tied to the blue-red deck gives it some nice flexibility, some cool gameplay decisions, and also maybe makes deck building more incentivized towards playing some of these splashy, cool kind of big instants and sorceries. Now, there is also a blue-green deck in this set. The college is tied to math, so it really makes sense that their mechanic is tied to mathing out your spells and what you want to do. There's a lot of X spells in the deck, which I think was a brilliant innovation. I also think it's really smart to have the increment mechanic, which is relatively straightforward. Your creature grows when you cast spells and spend more mana to cast those spells than the creature has power or toughness. So you have a 1/1 creature with increment, you spend 2 mana on a spell, it gets a counter. So over the course of the game, you have to be casting bigger and bigger and bigger spells to keep growing your increment creatures. And I think that it naturally flows out with what kind of the deck wants to be doing. Having your creatures grow kind of makes sense that it's kind of mathematical, be okay, okay, I want to spend a 3-mana spell to grow this 2-drop creature, and also kind of lead to some interesting gameplay decisions where like you have an increment creature with 2 power, and then you have a 3-mana spell and a 4-mana spell, and choosing which one to play is interesting because you want to deploy your more powerful spell first, maybe play the 4-drop, but if you play the 3-drop first, then you can get a counter on your 2-drop, and then also get a counter when you play the 4-drop, whereas if you play them in the reverse order, you get 1 less counter. So I think that those are all really brilliant innovations as well, making the archetypes, I'm using the word brilliant a lot, I think they're just doing a really good job. And then the black-white deck being the aggro deck, that was something they did in original Strixhaven. It cared about the +1/+1 counters in that format. It cares about +1/+1 counters in this format because there's a lot of cards that put those there to help grow these snowbally threats. They gave this mechanic repartee, a thing where it's if you cast an instant or sorcery that targets a creature, and so that can be your creatures, their creatures, but repartee is an interesting kind of way to have Silverquill be kind of thematically tied together, because to cast an instant or sorcery, you're generally going to have to speak. And Silverquill is all about speaking, and kind of like if you're targeting creatures, then you're kind of like directing your words at something. And I think that's a really cool way to kind of make the theme flow naturally, from Silverquill being like the verbal school of sorts. So I think they've kind of made all of those archetypes really look like really nicely done, and I love the way that they've organized them. And as I said, it's a little bit of a knock on potential gameplay that there's only 5 archetypes, but it's Strixhaven, you need to have the 5 archetypes, and I think it's great that they brought them back and did a really good job, I think, making it like more familiar for people who played Strixhaven, and also the people that didn't get to play original Strixhaven and are kind of like, oh, they're bringing back the same stuff, so I get to kind of experience what it's like. I think they did a great job. Now, the big mechanic of this set is the prepared mechanic, where they kind of have these creatures, they enter prepared a lot of the time, or they become prepared in some way, and then there's a spell they can cast once they are prepared, and then they become unprepared. And a lot of the cards have these kind of prepared spells. I think those are really cool because a lot of the times creatures have spells associated with them anyway, because they'll have an enters effect, and that kind of effect will be like oh, enter, deal 2 damage. That's like, okay, it's kind of got a spell associated with it because it's a creature, and then it has like something it does when it comes into play. But the prepared mechanic lets you kind of like give yourself more flexibility on when you get to deploy that secondary spell. Some creatures have expensive prepared spells, so you play the creature early, wait till the late game to use the prepared spell. Some have really cheap prepared spells, so you want to maybe play them the creature and use the prepared spell in the same turn to let yourself get like that effect right away. And I think that they've kind of done a really cool job. And my favorite part of the prepared mechanic is they've brought back iconic spell names. So like these big classic spells from Magic's past have been associated now with prepared spells, so that more players can understand. It brings more players in to kind of the circle of like, oh, when I say rampant growth, it's like a 2-mana ramp effect. And there's a prepared creature in this set that has rampant growth as its prepared spell. So now other players will be like, oh, when he says rampant growth, this is what he means. And so it brings people in. It'd be like, okay, we're all part of the Magic lore. There's a lot of iconic spells attached to the higher rarity cards, like Ancestral Recall is a prepared spell on a mythic rare. And so you just be like, oh man, I cast Ancestral Recall. And so it's just kind of a cool thing where players that have played for a long time can be like, okay, I remember playing these spells originally. Or players that like have been playing for a decent amount of time can be like, okay, I've always known this reference, but I've always kind of wanted to cast the actual spell or something like that. And then new players get brought in and are like, oh, that's what they mean. That's why this thing is called a rampant growth effect. Or that's why this thing, they're like, oh, you just got an Ancestral Recall. You drew a bunch of cards. Like they just like Swords to Plowshare my creature, because that's another like one of the spells associated with a prepared creature. Those things are all really, really cool. And I think it's great that they've brought back those like iconic spells as prepared spells, so more people can kind of understand the like Magic as just the history stuff. And I think that's really cool, as well as being a really cool gameplay thing as well. Another thing they're bringing back with this set from original Strixhaven, though, is mystical archive slots. There's a bonus slot in each pack, which has a cool art card that's not from the main set, but just has a really cool artwork, and like you can play in your drafts and your sealeds if you get them, and they just like are going to be like a kind of like cool little curveball. This was like the first bonus sheet we had seen in a long time. It's like the first bonus sheet since like Time Spiral, where they had like a bonus sheet for future shifted cards or something. And so having these cards that are, there's going to be one in every pack. It's got really cool artwork. They're fun to open. They were really, really popular in original Strixhaven. Bringing them back is really, really smart, and I'm really glad they did that. They just add a unique element to gameplay where you kind of know all the cards in the main set, and then the secret, like the bonus sheet, the mystical archive cards, they kind of give you a different take on gameplay sometimes, because maybe you'll have like a mystical archive card that works well with cards in a way that other cards from the main set don't, and that can just be a really cool thing as well. So bringing those back, really cool play. And it kind of, because they were so popular in Secrets of Strixhaven, or the original Strixhaven, I think they kind of spawned a lot of bonus sheets in the future, and bonus sheets have just been kind of a cool addition to Limited. They give a lot of cool replayability, because when you get a bonus sheet card that you haven't seen before, you get kind of that fresh gameplay experience, especially when it works with cards from the set that are like maybe like not dedicated towards one of the homes, but they kind of like will work well with a bonus sheet card. And that's another thing, when one of the benefits of going into a 5 archetype set is you have a couple of extra flex slots, I think, in the design file to kind of be like, hey, I can build like make a red card that doesn't go into red, white, or red-blue, it's just kind of like an interesting red card that people can try to figure out how to use. And I think they've got a couple of cards like that in the file that are kind of like, oh, this doesn't necessarily fit into this deck. It doesn't necessarily fit into this deck, but I think it's still a really cool card design, and one that like trying to figure out how to make it work can be a cool like little challenge to like maximize a card that has a really powerful upside, but needs maybe a little bit more support or doesn't fit dedicated into a deck. There are some really cool card designs in this set. I think they've done a really good job of like innovating, continuing to make cards that are very cool. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the flavor of this set. The artwork, absolutely out of the park. The flavor text on cards, I was trying to pick some of my favorites to highlight, but there's just so many good ones where you just like read it. And I was just reading through the card file, just going through the flavor text, like, okay, I could spend like a long time reading all the flavor text. And I was just laughing, having a good time, being like, oh my gosh, this card's amazing. Great callback reference to the original Strixhaven, or just like a cool, like, oh, that's like it's kind of fun because a lot of the things are student based and a lot of people can relate to being a student. And so like a lot of the like little flavor text, even though it's in a magical university or college context, it's like, oh, that's kind of funny, or things like that. So I think they've done a really good job with the flavor, bringing an in-universe set and absolutely knocking it out of the park as far as flavor is concerned, bringing back the feeling of the original while also enhancing it and making it good for the future. Anyway, those are my opinions on the Secrets of Strixhaven. I think it's going to be a fantastic set. I'm going to try to revisit this topic later on to hopefully have my predictions validated, because I'm really excited for the set and I think it's going to be fantastic. If you made it to the end of this video, in the comment section down below, leave hashtag Strixhaven hype to let me know you made it all the way to the end, because I'm really excited for the set, very hype, and I hope you are hyped as well. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.